The morning sun peeked through the lace curtains as Margaret Wilson sat in her favorite armchair, her knitting needles clicking softly. At 75 years old, she had settled into a comfortable routine. Her small apartment was cozy and filled with memories. Photographs of her late husband smiled from every shelf, and her collection of porcelain birds rested on the windowsill. She had grown used to the quiet life after her husband passed away 20 years ago. Her days now consisted of watching her favorite game shows, knitting scarves for the local shelter, and occasionally joining her neighbors for afternoon tea. But beneath her peaceful exterior, there was something she rarely talked about: her love for singing. That afternoon, her granddaughter Rachel burst through the door with the energy only a college student on holiday could have. Rachel was 22, full of life, and always looking for ways to make her grandmother laugh. She loved her grandmother dearly, but sometimes worried that she had become too isolated. "Granny, I brought you some fresh oranges from the market," Rachel called out cheerfully, setting down her bags on the kitchen counter. Margaret smiled warmly at her granddaughter. Rachel reminded her so much of herself at that age: confident, spirited, and perhaps a bit mischievous. As they sat down for tea, Rachel chatted about her college experiences, her new friends, and the latest trends that Margaret pretended to understand. While they talked, Rachel's eyes fell on a colorful poster she had noticed on the community board earlier that day. The annual Riverside Talent Show was coming up next week. Looking at her grandmother sitting there, lost in thought, an idea started forming in Rachel's mind. A playful, slightly mischievous idea. "Granny," Rachel began hesitantly, "do you still sing?" Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, that was ages ago, dear. I used to sing in the church choir, but that was before your grandfather." Her voice trailed off. Rachel remembered the old stories her mother had told her, how her grandmother had once had a beautiful voice that could fill a room, how she and her grandfather had met at a choir practice, how singing had been such a big part of her life until the day her husband died, and then the music simply stopped. Later that evening, after Margaret had gone to bed, Rachel sat at her laptop, the talent show registration page open before her. She knew it was probably not the best idea, but something pushed her to type in her grandmother's name. "It'll be funny," she thought to herself. "The family will get a good laugh when they find out Granny's been entered in a talent show." She filled out the form quickly, selecting singing as the talent category. In her mind, she imagined telling her parents and cousins about this little prank at their next family dinner. They would all laugh, and of course, her grandmother would never actually have to perform. It was just a harmless joke. But as she clicked the submit button, Rachel didn't realize that the organizers would send confirmation emails to all participants. She didn't know that her simple prank would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. Meanwhile, Margaret slept peacefully in her room, unaware that in just 2 days she would receive an email that would pull her out of her quiet routine and thrust her into a situation she hadn't faced in decades. The stage was set, though no one knew it yet, for an extraordinary moment that would touch the hearts of everyone involved. The next morning, life continued as usual. Margaret watered her plants, fed the birds on her balcony, and settled down to watch her morning shows. Rachel left for her part-time job, already forgetting about the talent show registration. Neither of them could have predicted how this simple act would unfold into something truly remarkable. As the sun set that evening, casting a golden glow across Margaret's apartment, she hummed softly to herself while preparing dinner, a habit she had never completely lost. The melody was an old favorite, one she used to sing with her husband. Little did she know that very soon she would be sharing that voice with the world again. 2 days had passed since Rachel's innocent prank. Margaret was enjoying her morning routine, sipping tea from her favorite blue cup, when she heard the familiar ping of her email notification. She had learned to use email only recently, thanks to Rachel's patient teaching. Usually, the messages were from her book club or grocery store advertisements. With her reading glasses perched on her nose, Margaret opened her inbox. There, sitting at the top, was an email with the subject line, "Riverside Talent Show, Performance Confirmation." Her heart skipped a beat. This must be a mistake, she thought, clicking on the message with trembling fingers. "Dear Margaret Wilson," the email began, "we are delighted to confirm your participation in this year's Riverside Talent Show. You are scheduled to perform on Saturday evening at 7:30 p.m. Your category is Vocal Performance, Solo. Please arrive 1 hour before your scheduled time for registration." Margaret read the email 3 times, each time hoping the words would change. But they remained the same. She sat back in her chair, confusion clouding her face. Who would do such a thing? She wondered aloud. Then, like a light bulb switching on, she remembered Rachel's odd questions about singing just 2 days ago. The way her granddaughter had looked at her with that mischievous twinkle in her eye. The same look she had when she was 5 and had hidden all the cookies in her toy box. Margaret picked up her phone and dialed Rachel's number. It rang 4 times before her granddaughter answered, sounding suspiciously cheerful. "Hi, Granny. How are you this morning?" "Rachel, dear," Margaret began calmly, "did you happen to sign me up for a talent show?" There was a long pause on the other end. Margaret could almost hear the wheels turning in her granddaughter's head. "Well, it was supposed to be a joke, Granny," Rachel finally admitted, her voice small. "I thought it would be funny to tell everyone at dinner next week. I didn't think they'd actually send you an email." Margaret sighed deeply. "Rachel, sweetheart, this isn't the kind of joke you play on someone my age. The show is in 5 days." "I'm so sorry, Granny." Rachel's voice was filled with genuine remorse. "I'll call them right now and cancel. It was stupid of me. Please don't be mad." Margaret was about to agree when something unexpected happened. As she looked around her quiet apartment, at the photos of her younger self on stage with the choir, at her husband's encouraging smile frozen in time, a spark of something long forgotten stirred within her. "Wait," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. "Don't call them." "What?" Rachel sounded confused. "But Granny, you don't have to do this. It was my mistake." Margaret stood up straighter, feeling a determination she hadn't felt in years. "You know what, Rachel? Maybe this is exactly what I need. I've been hiding in this apartment for too long." "Are you serious?" Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You want to perform?" "Why not?" Margaret replied, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice. "I used to love singing. Your grandfather always said I had a gift. Maybe it's time I remembered that." Rachel was silent for a moment, then said, "Granny, are you sure? People might. I mean, they might not expect someone your age to." "To what?" "To sing." Margaret interrupted gently. "Let them think what they want. I've spent 20 years being quiet. Maybe it's time to make some noise." After hanging up, Margaret walked to her bedroom closet. She reached deep into the back and pulled out an old music box. Inside were sheet music pages yellowed with age, photos from her choir days, and a small silver locket her husband had given her before a big performance. She opened the locket and found his tiny photo inside, along with the inscription, "Your voice is my favorite song." Tears welled up in her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were tears of awakening, of remembering who she used to be before grief had silenced her song. That evening, Rachel called again, still worried about her grandmother's decision. But Margaret's mind was made up. "Thank you, dear," she told her granddaughter. "Your prank might just be the best thing that's happened to me in years." With only 48 hours until the talent show, Margaret felt a mix of excitement and nervousness she hadn't experienced in decades. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, taking a deep breath. "All right, Margaret," she told her reflection. "Let's see if you still have it in you." She started humming softly, testing her voice. It was rusty, like an old door that hadn't been opened in years. But as she continued, warming up with simple scales she remembered from choir practice, something magical began to happen. The notes became clearer, stronger, more confident. After much thought, she had chosen Amazing Grace for her performance. It was the song she had sung at her husband's funeral, the last time she had performed in public. The memory was bittersweet, but she felt it was the right choice. It was a song that held all her emotions: love, loss, faith, and hope. Margaret practiced in her bathroom because the acoustics were good, and she felt less self-conscious there. At first, her voice cracked on the high notes, and she had to stop several times to catch her breath. But she didn't give up. She remembered her husband's words, "Practice doesn't make perfect, my dear. Practice makes progress." By the afternoon, she was singing with more confidence. Her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, knocked on her door to ask if everything was all right. "I heard singing," she said, looking concerned. "I thought maybe you had the radio on too loud." Margaret smiled. "No, Mrs. Peterson, that was me." The neighbor's eyes widened in surprise. "You? But Margaret, I've lived next door for 15 years, and I've never heard you sing." "Well," Margaret replied with a twinkle in her eye, "maybe it's time for some changes." Later that day, Margaret went to her closet to find something to wear. She pushed aside her everyday clothes and reached for a garment bag she hadn't touched in years. Inside was her best Sunday dress, a deep blue number with delicate lace trim. She had bought it for her 50th wedding anniversary, but her husband had passed away before they could celebrate. She tried it on, pleased to find it still fit perfectly. Looking in the mirror, she saw glimpses of the woman she used to be, confident, vibrant, full of life. She carefully polished her late husband's watch, deciding to wear it for good luck. It was an old-fashioned pocket watch that she planned to keep in her dress pocket close to her heart. The next day, Rachel called to check on her grandmother. She was still feeling guilty about the prank, but was amazed by Margaret's determination. "How's the practice going, Granny?" she asked hesitantly. "Better than I expected," Margaret replied. "My voice is coming back. It's like riding a bicycle. You never really forget." "Do you want me to come over and help?" Rachel offered. "No, dear. I need to do this on my own. But I would love it if you came to watch me perform." Rachel promised she would be there, front and center. After hanging up, Margaret continued her preparations. She practiced breathing exercises she remembered from her choir days, did gentle stretches to help with her posture, and sang her song over and over until she knew every note by heart. On the morning of the talent show, Margaret woke up early. She made herself a cup of honey tea to soothe her throat and spent some quiet time looking at old photographs. There was one of her and her husband at a choir concert, both of them beaming with joy. She touched the photo gently and whispered, "Wish me luck, my love." She spent the day resting her voice, humming occasionally to keep it warm. As evening approached, she carefully did her hair and makeup, something she rarely bothered with anymore. When she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The woman looking back at her seemed younger, more alive. With her dress pressed, her husband's watch in her pocket, and her heart full of determination, Margaret was ready. She had transformed her small bathroom into a practice studio and her quiet life into an adventure. Whatever happened at the talent show, she had already won something precious: the courage to sing again. The evening of the talent show arrived with a cool breeze and a sky painted in shades of orange and purple. Margaret stepped out of her taxi at the community center, her heart beating faster than usual. She clutched her small purse, feeling the weight of her husband's watch inside, drawing strength from its presence. As she entered the building, the buzz of excitement filled the air. Young performers rushed past her, carrying guitars, dance costumes, and props. Margaret made her way to the registration desk, where a young volunteer looked up at her with surprise. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The volunteer asked, clearly assuming Margaret was there to watch, not perform. "I'm Margaret Wilson. I'm here to perform," she said clearly, showing her confirmation email. The volunteer's eyebrows shot up. She checked her list, then looked back at Margaret with barely concealed amusement. "Oh, yes, here you are. Vocal performance. Please head backstage, third door on the left." As Margaret walked through the crowd, she could feel eyes on her. Whispers followed in her wake like autumn leaves rustling behind her feet. Is that old lady actually performing? Someone must have made a mistake. This should be interesting. Backstage was even worse. A group of teenagers practicing a dance routine stopped and stared when she entered. One of them nudged his friend and whispered something that made them both laugh. Margaret pretended not to notice, finding a quiet corner to sit and collect her thoughts. The stage manager, a middle-aged man with a clipboard, approached her with concern written all over his face. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you lost? The audience seating is out front." "I'm performing tonight," Margaret replied calmly. "Margaret Wilson, vocal performance." The man checked his clipboard, confusion growing on his face. "This must be some kind of mistake. Are you sure you're in the right place? Maybe there's been a mix-up with the senior center's schedule." Margaret felt her cheeks grow warm. "There's no mistake. I'm here to sing." The stage manager hesitated, then said in a lowered voice, "Look, ma'am, I don't want you to embarrass yourself. These shows can be tough. The audience expects, well, you know, actual talent. Maybe we could just say there was a scheduling error. For a moment, Margaret felt her confidence waver. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should just go home and return to her quiet life. But then she felt the weight of her husband's watch in her purse and remembered why she was here. "Thank you for your concern," she said firmly, "but I'll be performing as scheduled." The stage manager shrugged and walked away, shaking his head. Margaret could hear him telling another staff member, "We've got a situation here. Keep an eye on the old lady." As the show began, Margaret watched from the wings as younger performers took the stage. There were dancers with perfect moves, singers with powerful voices, musicians with impressive skills. Each act received enthusiastic applause. During the intermission, the host, a local radio personality known for his quick wit, made his rounds backstage. When he saw Margaret, he couldn't resist making a joke. "Well, folks, looks like we have a special guest tonight. I didn't know the bingo club was putting on a show." The crew laughed, and Margaret forced a small smile, refusing to let them see how their words stung. More performers whispered and pointed. Some took selfies, making faces behind her back. A young woman practicing scales nearby deliberately sang louder when Margaret tried to warm up her voice, as if to show her what real singing sounded like. Through it all, Margaret sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. She thought about leaving several times. The mockery was harder to bear than she had expected. But each time she considered walking out, she remembered her husband's words. "Your voice is a gift, Margaret. Don't let anyone make you forget that." As her performance time drew near, Margaret stood up and smoothed her dress. She touched her husband's watch one more time, took a deep breath, and prepared to face whatever came next. The whispers and jokes continued around her, but she had made her decision. She would sing, not for them, but for herself and the memory of the man who had always believed in her. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the host announced with barely hidden amusement, "we have something special for you. Please welcome Margaret Wilson." The audience responded with scattered, confused applause. Some people chuckled, thinking this must be some kind of comedy act. In the back row, a group of teenagers started laughing openly, and one shouted, "Go home, Grandma." Margaret walked onto the stage slowly but steadily. The bright lights momentarily blinded her, but she kept moving forward until she reached the microphone stand. The laughter and whispers grew louder as she adjusted the microphone to her height with slightly shaking hands. She could see faces in the front rows, some curious, some amused, some already bored. A few people were holding up their phones, ready to record what they assumed would be a disaster. Margaret closed her eyes, trying to shut out the negativity surrounding her. In that moment of darkness, she remembered her husband's face, the way he looked at her when she sang just for him in their living room. She remembered the joy of singing in the church choir, the feeling of her voice soaring through the high ceilings. She remembered who she was before she let grief silence her song. Taking a deep breath, Margaret opened her eyes and began to sing. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound." The first note that left her lips was pure and clear, cutting through the mockery like a beam of light through darkness. The laughter stopped abruptly, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire auditorium. "That saved a wretch like me." Her voice, rich with years of emotion and experience, filled every corner of the room. It wasn't just technically good, it was deeply moving. Each word carried the weight of her life's joys and sorrows, her love and loss, her faith and hope. "I once was lost, but now I'm found." The teenagers in the back row slowly lowered their phones, forgetting to record as they became lost in the moment. People who had been whispering to their neighbors fell silent. The stage manager, who had tried to talk her out of performing, stood in the wings with his mouth slightly open. "Was blind, but now I see." As Margaret continued through the verses, her voice grew stronger and more confident. She wasn't just singing the words, she was living them. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but her voice never wavered. The emotion in her performance was so raw, so genuine, that it touched something deep within everyone listening. In the audience, people began to lean forward in their seats. A mother wiped tears from her eyes. An elderly man clutched his wife's hand tighter. Even the host, who had made jokes at her expense, stood transfixed at the side of the stage. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, Margaret's voice soared on the high notes, displaying a range and control that seemed impossible for someone who hadn't performed in 20 years. But this wasn't about technical perfection. It was about truth, about sharing a piece of her soul with everyone in that room. "I have already come." The teenagers who had mocked her earlier now sat in respectful silence, some with tears in their eyes. They were witnessing something they had never expected, not just a performance, but a revelation of the human spirit. "'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far." As she approached the final verse, Margaret's voice filled with even more power. She wasn't just an elderly woman singing at a talent show anymore. She was a testament to the idea that it's never too late to reclaim your passion, to surprise the world, to prove everyone wrong. "And grace will lead me home." The last note hung in the air, pure and perfect, like a crystal suspended in time. Margaret stood there, eyes closed, letting the final vibrations of her voice fade away naturally. For a moment, the entire auditorium remained absolutely still, as if the audience needed time to return from the journey she had taken them on. Then silence gave way to magic. As Margaret continued singing, something extraordinary began to happen throughout the auditorium. The transformation wasn't just in the audience's reaction, it was in the very atmosphere of the room. The energy had shifted from mockery to reverence, from judgment to wonder. Her voice carried through the hall with a power that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her small frame. Each note told a story, of love that had endured, of loss that had shaped her, of faith that had sustained her through the darkest times. The teenagers who had been recording on their phones slowly lowered their devices, realizing that this moment was too sacred to be reduced to a social media post. In the third row, a young mother held her sleeping baby closer, tears streaming down her face as Margaret's voice reminded her of her own grandmother who had passed away last year. A tough-looking construction worker in the fifth row found himself wiping his eyes with his calloused hands, transported back to Sunday mornings in church with his family. The stage lights seemed to glow softer around Margaret, creating an almost ethereal effect. Her blue dress shimmered gently, and her silver hair caught the light like a halo. She wasn't just performing anymore, she was sharing a piece of her soul with every person in that room. Behind the curtains, the other performers had gathered to watch. The young dancers who had whispered about her earlier stood in silent awe. A teenage guitarist whispered to his friend, "I've never heard anything like this." The stage manager, who had tried to convince her not to perform, stood with his clipboard hanging forgotten at his side, his eyes fixed on the small figure commanding the stage. Rachel had arrived late, slipping in through the back door just as her grandmother began to sing. She stood frozen at the rear of the auditorium, her hand covering her mouth in amazement. The guilt she had felt about her prank melted away, replaced by overwhelming pride. This wasn't the quiet grandmother she knew. This was a force of nature, a woman transformed by the power of her own voice. As Margaret moved into the final verse, her voice swelled with emotion. Parents in the audience reached for their children's hands. Couples leaned closer together. Even the judges, who had seen hundreds of performances over the years, sat transfixed, their scoring sheets forgotten. The host, who had made jokes about the senior moment earlier, now stood at the side of the stage with tears in his eyes. He had been in show business for 20 years, but he had never witnessed anything quite like this. The transformation wasn't just in Margaret, it was in everyone present. Hearts were opening, prejudices were falling away, and a room full of strangers was united in a moment of pure, shared humanity. In the balcony, an elderly man stood up slowly, his war veteran's cap in his hands. He had come to watch his granddaughter perform in the dance group, but now he found himself deeply moved by this unexpected performance. Margaret's voice had awakened memories he thought were long buried, of his own mother singing him to sleep, of hymns in foxholes during the war, of lullabies he had sung to his children. The security guard at the door, who usually spent shows checking his phone, stood at attention, listening intently. The concession stand workers had stopped selling snacks and gathered at the auditorium entrance to listen. Even the janitor, who had been sweeping the lobby, paused with his broom in hand, drawn by the incredible voice floating through the doors. As Margaret held the final note, the entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath with her. Time stood still. In that moment, age didn't matter, appearances didn't matter, preconceptions didn't matter. All that existed was the pure, beautiful truth of a voice that had been silent too long, now set free. When the last vibration of her voice faded away, Margaret opened her eyes. She saw faces transformed by emotion, eyes glistening with tears, expressions of wonder and respect. The woman who had walked onto that stage amid laughter and mockery had done more than sing a song. She had touched souls, changed hearts, and reminded everyone present of the power of authenticity and courage. For 3 long seconds after Margaret finished singing, the auditorium remained completely silent. It was as if the audience needed time to process what they had just experienced, to return from the emotional journey she had taken them on. Margaret stood still at the microphone, her heart pounding, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Then, like a dam breaking, the entire audience erupted. The elderly veteran in the balcony was the first to stand, his weathered hands coming together in thunderous applause. Within moments, everyone else followed. Row after row rose to their feet, parents lifting their children up, teenagers whooping and cheering, elderly couples standing with tears in their eyes. The sound of applause filled the auditorium like rolling thunder, growing louder and stronger with each passing second. Margaret's eyes widened in disbelief as she watched the standing ovation spread through the crowd. People weren't just clapping politely, they were cheering, whistling, and some were openly crying. The teenagers who had mocked her earlier were now among the loudest supporters, their phones held high, but this time capturing a moment of triumph rather than expected failure. The host rushed onto the stage, his earlier smugness completely gone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "in 20 years of hosting talent shows, I have never, this is..." He turned to Margaret, abandoning his professional demeanor. "Ma'am, that was absolutely incredible. I owe you an apology. We all do." From the back of the auditorium, Rachel pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She had recorded the entire performance on her phone, but she knew no video could capture the magic of what had just happened. As she reached the stage, Margaret saw her and opened her arms wide. "Granny," Rachel sobbed as she embraced her grandmother. "I'm so sorry. I never imagined. I had no idea. You were amazing." Margaret held her granddaughter tight, whispering, "Thank you, dear. Your silly prank gave me back my voice." The judge's decision was unanimous. When they announced Margaret as the winner, the audience erupted again. The trophy seemed almost unnecessary. She had already won something far more precious. She had reclaimed a part of herself she thought was lost forever. As people filed out of the auditorium, many stopped to shake Margaret's hand or hug her. The teenagers asked for selfies with her. Parents thanked her for showing their children that talent has no age limit. The other performers congratulated her with genuine admiration. The next morning, Margaret woke up to find her phone flooded with messages. Rachel's video of her performance had gone viral overnight. News stations wanted interviews. Local churches invited her to sing at their services. The senior center asked if she would lead a choir. Music schools requested her presence as a guest speaker. But the most meaningful message came from a woman who had been in the audience. "Dear Mrs. Wilson," it read, "I lost my husband last year and haven't sung since. Your performance last night reminded me that it's never too late to find joy again. Thank you for your courage." Margaret sat at her kitchen table, her husband's watch beside her morning tea. She looked at his photo and smiled. "We did it, my love," she whispered. "We showed them all." Over the next few months, Margaret's life transformed completely. She accepted some of the performance invitations, started teaching singing at the community center, and even recorded a small album of hymns. But more importantly, she had inspired countless others to pursue their forgotten dreams. Rachel often accompanied her grandmother to events, proudly introducing herself as the one who accidentally discovered a star. Their relationship grew stronger than ever, built on a foundation of mutual respect and admiration. The talent show video continued to spread across the internet, touching hearts around the world. Comments poured in from people of all ages, sharing how Margaret's story had motivated them to dust off old dreams and try again. Margaret Wilson, the quiet widow who had lived in silence for 20 years, had become a symbol of hope and courage. Her message was simple but powerful. It's never too late to share your gift with the world. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment of bravery to change everything.